The folder landed on my kitchen table with a sound I'll never forget. Not loud, just final. My son's hands were steady. Mine should have been shaking. The air in the room caught in my throat. Outside, the scent of fresh paint from the shutters I'd just finished drifted in. I could see the September sunlight bend across the counter, tracing the old wood that had carried every meal in memory for 37 years. I barely heard Theodore list off incidents, just his voice, practiced and tight. Fiona's gaze trailed across the crown molding, never meeting mine. If you've ever been called too old by the child you sacrificed everything for, lean in. I promise it gets darker. Have you ever been told you're losing your mind by your own child, not out of love, but for gain? That moment drops like ice in your blood. Sign over the house, Mom, he said, sliding papers my way. You're too old to manage it. We'll renovate the basement apartment for you. The twins will be right upstairs. My smile, small and knowing, unsettled him. What would you do if your child rehearsed your destruction? That sundae stretched as thin as the layer of butter on Theodore's favorite toast. He'd always been fond of more, but only if someone else spread it. He and Fiona arrived with their folder tucked under his arm, the type lawyers hand out when they're finished pretending to care. My shutters were still drying and they didn't bother knocking before letting themselves in. Theodore started listing incidents. The missed call when I was at a church retreat, the Saturday I said no to babysitting because bronchitis hit, the water bill paid late once in 15 years, each story carefully arranged, painting me as the problem. Fiona kept her eyes on the molding, letting Theodore speak for both. The so-called solution was sliding the house papers to me, $340,000 worth of history to be signed away, all with the promise of a basement apartment once they made themselves comfortable upstairs. There was no tremor in my hands. I counted the soap bubbles in the sink, measured the sunstripes on the dining table, felt the weight of every sacrifice. I studied Theodore's voice, more concerned than caring. He kept listing reasons, never once remembering why that garden bloomed or why the twins ran for me on Saturdays. The air felt heavy. The silverware they hadn't yet touched clinked as I set their plates. I watched Fiona decorate the house in her head. Have you ever watched someone you raised try to take the home that made them? I wanted to ask out loud. My small smile sent Theodore shifting in his seat. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. Instead, I reached for my own folder, prepared by someone who knew the law better than Theodore's attorney ever would. That's interesting, Theodore, I said, sounding calm enough to spook him. If someone you loved said something this cruel in your own home, would you speak up? Now or wait? Comment, wait for the moment if you'd have stayed seated and planned your next move. As my son stayed silent, a phrase echoed in my mind, not half the woman. And I knew, in that instant, I was done paying their rent. 8 months of screenshots, 12 records. Theodore thought I couldn't possibly keep order, but he was wrong. I laid my folder on the table, opening it slowly, the way I unwrapped gifts no one thought I deserved. First a copy of my will, then trust documents. A log charting every attempt Theodore made to guilt trip or push me out. Screenshots marked every date Fiona called me declining behind my back. Their plan wasn't care. It was profit in Charlotte. My nurse's hands stayed steady. Convince the old lady, the messages read. Get her to sign it, then sell fast. Theodore's face drained of color as each document landed, one by one, in front of him. Fiona's perfume turned sweet, then sour as she realized what was unfolding. The coffee I'd made them cooled, untouched, as autumn air crept through the open window. You think I'm declining, baby, but your character certainly is. I said it not as a rebuke, but as fact, a diagnosis anyone could read. With precision over drama. The papers spoke for themselves. The house was already tucked away in a trust, untouchable. Every dollar set aside for my church and a scholarship fund in my father's name. Theodore's dreams dissolved with each page flipped. Fiona, cold and still, revealed calculation beneath every smile. Theodore started breathing short, a tell from his childhood I remembered from scraped knees and lost games. Fiona's eyes darted. No greeting, no apology, just positioning for an accusation. The crux landed. Their plan was not to care for me, but leverage what I'd created to build their own comfort elsewhere. Theodore shot up, the chair skidding against the wall. "You owe me that house," he screamed, and for the first time in 37 years I heard my son's truth. Not love, not gratitude, but expectation. Pause and answer. Ever heard someone's real self show up in one sentence? He started shouting, "Bitter old woman." Bitter 7 times, softer each time, while I realized the son I'd protected was gone, hiding behind anger and pride. Fiona switched tactics quick. Her hands dabbed under her eyes, tears that never touched her cheeks, talking about the twins' future as if I'd ever wished them anything but joy. It snapped in my chest, a clean break not filled with hate but with relief. For 7 years, I'd traded weekends for twins' laughter, spent 40-minute drives for Theodore and Fiona's date nights, covered babysitting duties while swallowing pain that never earned a thank you. Not once did they offer gas money. I'd been a free service, not a grandmother in their eyes, just someone to keep their Saturdays easy. The air thickened with grief. I held my heartbeat steady, like in trauma rooms years ago. Sunlight faded along the kitchen floor, the sound of nearby dinners from neighbors slipped into our silence. Maybe they heard the commotion, maybe not, but in that kitchen, the gap between truth and expectation had widened beyond fixing. I didn't argue, I didn't defend. Theodore looked at me as if I owed him life itself. He saw debt, not gift. Fiona clung to his arm, planning her exit. "Let's go," she hissed. I remembered painting that front door yellow when Theodore was 5. He said it looked like sunshine. Fiona let him out quickly, glancing at the dining set she'd already claimed. Within a week, Theodore hired an attorney. But what arrived for me wasn't dread, it was surprise. The fight was far from done. But in losing what I'd thought was family, I gained a peace that no argument could tear apart. Tuesday morning came with dew on the garden gloves and hope in the roses Theodore once helped plant. I was halfway through watering when the phone rang. "Margaret Coleman, this is Alice Peterson from Mercy General. We have a proposal for you." For the first time in days, I set the watering can down, felt the weight of every year, and let the voice on the end remind me that worth was not measured in contracts or signatures. Helen talked softly, her voice clear, offering me a consulting role. Train new nurses, share what decades in surgery had taught me. A modest salary, a real community that valued everything my own son tried to erase. The offer arrived just as Theodore hired an attorney, gunning for a competency challenge, hoping to prove I shouldn't manage my own home. I agreed without hesitation, purpose flowering again in places I thought were empty. I started documenting everything, work history, finances, doctor's notes, knowing the real fight would be on paper, not in love. The mug I sipped from bore "World's Best Mom." Theodore gave it to me years ago, and now it tasted of irony, not pride. My roses bloomed despite everything. The neighborhood held its breath, and purpose returned to my shoulders more gentle than regret. Through quiet vindication, a door opened as another slammed. The community knew what family had forgotten. I felt restored, shielded by competence, years of grace sewn into every memory. The consulting job started in 2 weeks, Theodore's challenge in 3. He thought he was taking my home. He didn't realize he was about to face a nurse who survived every tough season with steadiness and strength. I'd seen worse wounds. His greed was just another. I hung up and checked my calendar. Theodore's hearing loomed, but my resolve outgrew his plans. Have you ever had karma call you with a job offer? This is about to get good. The banging began late Wednesday, 11:47 p.m., enough to shake the quiet. By Friday, my neighbors had cameras rolling, proof stacking up in bits and pieces I never needed to ask for. On Saturday, the police car flashing blue and white meant only one thing: a restraining order was coming. Theodore showed up 3 nights in a row, demanding I fix this, shoving shame and pride into every shout. He threatened, he pleaded, every approach a reminder that love turned to ownership in his eyes long ago. I never opened the door. I wrote each time and phrase down, letting Mrs. Patterson from next door place her hand on my shoulder when the police came. Cold night air brushed my cheeks. Theodore's voice grew raspy, and neighbors offered to stay over, where community stayed strong as family unraveled. The officer gave Theodore the restraining order right on my front lawn, the spot where I taught him to ride a bike. "Sir, you need to leave now," she told him. He looked at my door once more, a stranger wearing my son's face. I watched through the window, unseen but seeing everything. 12 nights until the hearing, 11 of them spent preparing to prove my sanity was stronger than his plans. Proof was everywhere, just not written the way Theodore wanted. Neighbors became my witnesses, testimonies that mattered more than contracts or accusations. His desperation was never about care. It was about taking what he thought was due. With legal protection set, I realized something simple. Community stands when family stumbles. Night after night, the world saw who Theodore really was, and I knew, finally, I wasn't alone. The judge would see it too. The banging started at 11:47 that Wednesday night. Wooden knocks echoed through my small house, so loud it hurt my chest. 3 nights, 3 faces, my son's, but not really, shining red in the porch light. "You need to fix this," he kept shouting. I sat in the living room, the neighbor's voice in my memory telling me to call the police if needed. Mrs. Patterson, bless her, was peering through her blinds next door. By Friday, neighbors had 3 different videos on their phones. The blue light rolled through the drapes when the police finally came. Theodore's words twisted from begging to threats. He never once asked if I felt safe. He just pleaded for what he thought belonged to him. Fiona didn't come. I stayed quiet. I jotted down the time. My hands were steady. I remembered every phone number on our block, each person who'd watched me raise Theodore in this house. The cold night air pressed in as the police asked me for a statement. "He's not himself," Mrs. Patterson whispered behind me. But deep down, I knew this was the self he'd hidden all along. On Saturday, the officer told Theodore on my lawn, "Sir, you need to leave now." The same grass where he learned to ride his bike. I watched from the window. He couldn't see me, but I saw him, a stranger in my son's face. The paper in the officer's hand was a restraining order. Theodore kept looking at the door, but he never raised his hand again. The court hearing was 12 days away. I spent 11 of them stacking my facts and staying busy. When family becomes the threat, everything shifts. My attorney's name was Miranda Lopez. The first thing she said after shaking my hand was, "They're going to attack your memory, so we're going to make yours better than theirs." I liked her confidence, sharp and warm all at once. In her office, Miranda and I sat beneath bright lights. She moved paper after paper across the desk. My doctor's letters, my employment history, financial records, every church bulletin where my name appeared, every note I'd made over the last year. She highlighted details. My handwriting, neat and strong, filled the margins. She called my doctor. He confirmed I was healthy, active, no sign of memory lapses. Our pastor sent in a statement, trustworthy, steady, involved. I made lists. I rehearsed every moment Theodore tried to shake me, dates, times, his words. Miranda nodded, satisfied every time I backed up her questions with the same details, never forgetting a thing. We planned how to talk through each topic, how to keep calm if Theodore's lawyer pushed too hard. Miranda prepared thoughtful questions for the others. She said, "Margaret, most of my clients are truly declining and their children are helping. This is different. Theodore wants more than he's owed. We'll show that." I left her office more sure than scared. Coffee from her front desk was bitter, but it jolted me out of my comfort zone in the best way. My calendar filled with meetings and prep calls. Each document became armor. My defense wasn't only in my words, but in the life I'd lived, written down and witnessed by many. Miranda closed her folder, smiled at me. For the first time since that dreadful Sunday, I felt ready. Preparation like this takes time. Watch what it builds. The old courthouse in Richmond always smelled of wax and wood. I walked past its columns with my doctor, Miranda, our pastor, and the stack of papers that proved every good year I'd worked for just this kind of day. Theodore showed up on the other side. His lawyer, a psychiatrist with a quick letter in his hand. Fiona absent. The judge wore glasses that glinted even in the dim light. The psychiatrist admitted under oath he'd never met me, just based his statements on Theodore's version of things. My doctor stood and said clearly, "No sign of decline. Margaret is mentally sharp, physically active." The pastor spoke of my role at church, my reliability, my kindness. Miranda brought out testimony from my new supervisor at Mercy General, how I'd started training fresh nurses, done excellent work. Finally, I was called to speak. I talked with clarity. Every date, every incident Theodore had twisted, I straightened. Calm, slow. I told them about the phone calls, the garden, the missed babysitting day when I had bronchitis. My records matched. My hands never shook. Theodore's lawyer tried to cast doubt, but I responded each time with proof. Real facts, steady voice. "She's worried about her legacy, not her health," his lawyer said at one point. My attorney simply handed over the trust document. The judge's eyebrows rose. She read it, then looked straight at Theodore. "Mr. Coleman," she said, "this court finds no sign of declining capacity in your mother. What I do find is a son who thinks his mother's house is his to claim. Case dismissed." I collected my purse and papers and walked outside into sunlight that felt sharp and new. Theodore sat on the steps, head in his hands, his lawyer gone. Fiona was nowhere. I did not stop. For 37 years I had carried and forgiven, but there was nothing left for me to give except the truth. Justice served cold. Subscribe because the aftermath is even better. CTA. Justice served cold. Subscribe because the aftermath is even better. That judge's line deserves to be quoted. Drop it in the comments. Training those young nurses felt like picking up an old song, my skills, my stories, all familiar, just waiting for the right ears. Every Tuesday, coffee with coworkers replaced quiet, lonely afternoons. Mercy General showed me gratitude I'd never expected. My time became full of real value again. Diane, my cousin in Atlanta, called on Sundays, her voice always full of laughter. Her questions didn't ask for updates on property or savings, only if I was happy. My house became mine again, not a battle zone. I painted the walls sage, never the beige Theodore preferred, and joined the choir at church. There, my days filled with new routines and a freedom I hadn't had in years. Young nurses wrote thank you notes, simple words that meant more than Theodore could have known. It didn't erase the pain of recent months, but the color came back to my life, bit by bit. That Wednesday, during a break in choir practice, my phone buzzed 7 times in 3 hours, all from Theodore. I stared at his name, closed my eyes, then let the messages sit. I almost deleted them. I didn't want fresh trouble breaking in, but the 7th voicemail started differently. "Mom, I need help." His voice was cracked, nothing put together. I sensed for the first time he truly meant it. Would you listen to those voicemails? Be honest in the comments. His voice was rough. Please came out broken. 5 times in his life I'd heard Theodore say it, never like this. He talked about losing his job because of the police records, about Fiona leaving and filing for divorce after learning he had planned to cut her out, too. The twins were with Fiona's parents, and Theodore had only supervised visits. He didn't apologize. He begged for money. No mention of fixing things, just desperation. I sat in the church parking lot, steering wheel cold under my hands, church bells ringing in the distance. Choir members' cars left one by one, headlights rolling across the lot. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing my son so lost, just sadness and a strange freedom. His pain wasn't victory, it was proof of consequence. For the first time, I knew I could hurt for my child and still protect myself. I was still in the car when I decided. My duty now wasn't to rescue, but to hold a line. It wasn't easy, but as Theodore's voice faded from my phone, I realized the truth. Sometimes helping means refusing to make things easy. What she does next will surprise you. Subscribe. This choice changes everything. CTA. What she does next will surprise you. Subscribe. This choice changes everything. Predict her move. What kind of help do you think she offers? I met Theodore at our public library, a neutral place. I brought no checkbook, only a thick manila folder. He slouched low, unshaven, eyes shifting. I slid the folder across the table, calm as a nurse checking a pulse. Inside, therapy contacts, local work placement offices, support group flyers for men rebuilding their lives. I can't pay your bills, Theodore, but I can show you where to start, I told him. My voice was gentle, maybe for the first time since he was small. He grew angry, then quiet. Hands shook as he scanned the page with the therapist's number, the one that worked with men who struggled to find their way after loss. I gave him another packet, this one for supervised visits and rebuilding trust with his daughters, a way forward if he chose. You taught me sacrifice was love, I confessed. I was wrong to do it without limits, but this time I won't trade my comfort for yours. Your choices begin here. He wiped his eyes, more real tears than I'd seen in years. We left the library with nothing settled between us but the start of something honest. He didn't thank me. I didn't expect him to. He left with the folder, walking heavy, but not broken. 3 months later, something arrived at my door that proved I'd made the right choice. Not a letter, not an apology. Something better. Real help looks different than rescue. Agree or disagree? The envelope arrived on a cold January morning. I didn't recognize the handwriting on the front, neat, careful, not Theodore's usual scrawl. Inside was a receipt from a therapist's office, paid in full, by Theodore Coleman, with money he'd earned himself from a new job. I stood by the window, reading glasses perched on my nose, the paper trembling slightly in my fingers, not from fear, but from something I hadn't let myself feel in months. Hope. He'd found work at a warehouse, modest pay, honest labor, the kind that builds character when you've lost everything else. The receipt showed weekly sessions, every Thursday at 6 p.m., never missed. A second page slipped out, a supervised visitation report from the social worker assigned to Theodore and the twins. He was showing up on time, following the rules, doing the hard work of rebuilding trust 1 hour at a time. At the bottom, a short note in his handwriting, I'm trying, not for you, for them, and for who I should have been. M. I didn't call him right away. I made tea, let it cool on the side table while I read the papers again. Real change doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It whispers through small, steady actions repeated until they become habit. Theodore was learning what I couldn't teach him. That worth comes from what you build, not what you take. The furnace clicked on, warm air filling the quiet house. I placed the envelope in my dresser drawer next to the folder from September, one holding proof of who he'd been, the other showing who he was trying to become. I didn't know if he'd make it all the way back, but for the first time in years, I knew something more important. Whether Theodore succeeded or failed, I would be fine. That night, Diane called. Her voice carried news that would test whether I truly meant what I'd just told myself. Real change is quiet and takes time. Have you seen this pattern? Come to Atlanta, Diane said, her Georgia accent warm through the phone. Not to visit, to stay. I have a mother-in-law suite nobody's using and a cousin who deserves to be wanted, not needed. I walked through my Richmond house while she talked, touching familiar things. the door frame where I'd marked Theodore's height each birthday, the kitchen counter I'd scrubbed 10,000 times, the window where I'd watched seasons change for 40 years. Diane's husband had passed 2 years back. Her house felt too big now, too quiet. She wanted company, not a caretaker, just someone to share coffee with on the porch, someone to laugh with at book club. Atlanta offered everything Richmond couldn't anymore. A fresh church community, volunteer work teaching CPR at the senior center, space to breathe without ghosts in every corner. My consulting work could transfer easily, or I could retire and finally rest. No strings attached, no hidden agenda, just an open door and a cousin who remembered me before I became everyone's sacrifice. I realized something while Diane talked. I was free. Not tied to Theodore's recovery or his failure, not bound by proximity or guilt or the weight of what-ifs. The choice before me had nothing to do with my son and everything to do with what I wanted for the years I had left. Richmond meant familiar streets and the possibility, however slim, of watching Theodore rebuild up close. Atlanta meant starting over where nobody knew me as Theodore's mother or that poor woman. Just Margaret. Just me. The January sunset painted the kitchen window gold and pink. I smelled dinner cooking, just enough for one, the way I liked it. The weight of this choice felt different from every other decision I'd made in 72 years. This one was mine alone. Let me think about it, I told Diane. That night, I made a list, not of pros and cons, but of things I'd been too busy sacrificing to want. Piano lessons, watercolor painting, sleeping past dawn without guilt. The list stretched longer than I expected. At the bottom, I wrote one question. What would 72-year-old Margaret choose if 35-year-old Margaret hadn't been so afraid? The answer came faster than I thought it would. Her next choice will define everything. Subscribe. You need to see what she decides. CTA. Her next choice will define everything. Subscribe. You need to see what she decides. What would you choose? Richmond or Atlanta? Comment your vote. Tuesday morning arrived clear and cold. I called Diane back before I could second-guess myself. I'm coming, I said, but I need you to understand something first. I'm not running from anything. I'm running towards something. There's a difference. The relief in Diane's voice made me smile. We planned for spring, April, when the Georgia heat wouldn't overwhelm me, when I'd have time to pack 40 years into boxes and decide what mattered enough to keep. The Richmond house would go up for sale, still held in trust, all proceeds flowing to the scholarship fund. Theodore would inherit nothing but the lesson I should have taught him decades ago. People aren't property. Miranda Lopez celebrated when I told her. You're choosing joy, she said, shaking my hand across her desk one last time. At Mercy General, the nursing staff gave me a standing ovation during my last shift. Young nurses hugged me, thanked me for teaching them not just about medicine, but about dignity. Our pastor blessed the decision during Sunday service, reminding me that honoring yourself honors God. Finally, I called Theodore, kept it brief, just facts. I'm moving to Atlanta in April. Diane has space, and I'm ready for something new. Silence stretched between us, the kind that used to make me rush to fill it with comfort or apology. Not anymore. I understand, Mom, he said, his voice measured, different from before. I hope it's good there. No guilt trip, no manipulation. Either his therapy was working, or he'd finally accepted I wasn't his resource anymore. Maybe both. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in years. February brought the "For Sale" sign planted in my front yard. Nurses at the hospital threw me a small goodbye party. I packed boxes labeled Atlanta, future, not past, and gave away furniture I'd held onto for no good reason. Each item released felt like shedding weight I'd carried too long. The moving truck was scheduled for April 15th. I marked the calendar, counting down days, not with dread, but with anticipation. On April 12th, 3 days before departure, I heard a knock at my door. Not banging, not demanding, quiet, respectful. I opened it to find Theodore standing there, Something in his hands I hadn't seen in years. Something that would give me the one gift I'd stopped expecting. Closure. 3 days before she leaves, what do you think he brought? He was holding a photo album. Not the family album I'd kept through the years. This was new, handmade, the cover marked in his careful handwriting. Things I forgot to see. Spring rain had just started, soft drops beginning their rhythm on the roof. Theodore's hair had grown out, and he wore work clothes from the warehouse, clean but worn. We stood in the doorway, neither knowing quite how to move. "Can I show you?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside just enough for him to enter, though I didn't invite him to sit. He opened the album on the kitchen table, the same spot where everything had started 6 months ago. Each page held a photo of me through the years, and beneath each one, captions Theodore had written himself. 1994, Mom's nursing shift notes the day I got my acceptance letter. She worked 16 hours, then drove 3 hours to tell me in person. I never asked how she stayed awake. 2015, wedding reception. Mom's dress was from Goodwill. She paid for our photographer instead. 2018, October 25, 347 babysitting visits. Mom drove 28,000 miles round trip. I never once filled her tank. Each caption acknowledged what he'd taken for granted, not asking for forgiveness, documenting what he'd failed to value. My hands shook as I turned the pages, seeing myself through his new eyes, a version of me I'd forgotten existed, buried under years of being used. "I made one for the twins, too," Theodore said quietly, teaching them what I never learned. Gratitude, seeing people, not just what they can give you. The rain picked up outside, cleansing and necessary. Theodore looked at me with clear eyes. "I can't give you back those years, but I can make sure my daughters know what I took. That's the only thing I have left to give you." We stood there, the album between us, neither knowing how to bridge the gap. I didn't cry. Not yet. "Thank you for this," I said. He nodded, understanding I wasn't inviting him in deeper. Understanding was enough. "I won't ask you to stay," he said. "You deserve Atlanta. You deserve everything I never gave you." He turned to leave, rain catching on his shoulders as he walked to his car. I watched him go, then closed the door and returned to the album. Hours later, alone in my living room, I let the tears come. Not for what was lost, but for what he'd finally seen. The photos showed a woman I'd been too busy serving to notice. Strong, capable, worth more than basement apartments and borrowed time. I closed the album and looked at the moving truck parked in my driveway. It would go to Atlanta with me, not as a trophy or a wound, but as proof that sometimes people grow just late enough to matter. 2 days later, on the morning of April 15th, I left Richmond with everything I needed and nothing I didn't. What I found in Atlanta wasn't a happy ending. It was something better. If this moment hit you, subscribe. The ending will complete you. That album proves growth. Does it change how you see him? Atlanta taught me something Richmond never could, that peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of choice. June arrived hot and heavy, different from Virginia's heat, thicker, slower, demanding you move at its pace. I'd settled into Diane's mother-in-law's suite, a space that felt like mine from day one. Mornings on the porch with coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. Evenings with Diane's book club. Women who knew me only as Margaret, not as anyone's mother or victim or sacrifice. My consulting work transferred to Atlanta's hospital network easily. Turned out good nurses were needed everywhere, and my decades of experience opened doors I didn't know existed. At 72, I was teaching CPR at the senior center, joining a new church where the choir welcomed my voice, planting a garden behind Diane's house where tomatoes and peppers grew under my careful hands. Theodore called every week, brief, boundaried, honest. "I'm still going to therapy," he'd say. "The twins asked about you yesterday." I kept the relationship at arm's length, not cold, just careful. Not because I owed him anything, but because I chose to stay connected on my terms. His pictures arrived by text, supervised visits where he actually played with his daughters instead of checking his phone. I sent encouraging words but didn't offer to visit. My role in his healing was to not be his solution. He had to build his own life. I enrolled in that watercolor painting class I'd delayed for 37 years. My first painting was the yellow door from my Richmond house, not as mourning for what I'd lost, but preserving what had been good before it turned complicated. Theodore sent more pictures. I replied with short, kind texts. The balance felt right. Connected but separate. Caring but not consumed. One Saturday in late June, I sat in a park with my easel painting the sunset. Diane walked over with lemonade, sat beside me on the bench. "You look different," she said. "Lighter." I cleaned my brush. Watching colors blend in the water, separate lives mixing into something new. I'm not angry anymore, I realized aloud, not because Theodore earned forgiveness, because I earned freedom. The sunset painted the sky pink, orange, and purple, my choice entirely. Church bells rang from the nearby cathedral. Magnolias scented the warm air. The lemonade tasted sweet without any trace of bitterness. Everything felt exactly as it should. Mine. Diane looked at my painting, the yellow door standing open. "What's next?" she asked. I thought about the life I'd built in 2 months, the friends who valued my company, the work that respected my skill, the cousin who wanted me around simply because she enjoyed me, the garden growing under Georgia's sun, the choir singing songs I chose, the boundaries I'd finally learned to draw and keep. "Whatever I want," I said. And for the first time in 72 years, I meant it. I finished the painting as evening settled over Atlanta. The yellow door stood open in my watercolor, but nobody walked through it, because the point wasn't who entered. The point was who got to decide. I signed the bottom corner. Margaret Coleman still standing. Sacrifice without boundaries creates entitlement, not gratitude. Documentation protects when words fail. Community witnesses truth when family denies it. Real change is sustained action, not dramatic apology. You can offer help without offering yourself. Choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Peace isn't earned by fixing others, it's claimed by honoring yourself. And most important, it's never too late for joy. Drop the one line from this story you'll carry with you. I want to hear what landed.